so that you can just have a look at the text. So we had finished this part where we had the epic similes which described Satan's stature and also described the you know the fallen angels. So now Milton, he is now going to give us a sort of a roll call of the fallen angels. And you will see here that they're mainly the leaders of the different categories of fallen angels. They would present themselves before Satan, and they have their own names, and they were later worshipped in different parts of the world in different by different names. They were called by different names by the residents of those places, and their temples, shrines were built beside the true temple or shrine of God. So we will have here the catalog of the fallen angels, and as I told you yesterday, uh, we would first, of course, look at the names of these fallen angels, that is the leaders, and read the short descriptions, not the whole of the descriptions, because it has a number of references which would be difficult to remember for you. It would be difficult and really pointless, because these would not, I think, would no, questions would not be set on these, uh, but you need to know their names. So let us read from line number 392. So the catalog of the fallen angels, just remember that it is starting from this line 391, and the first uh, fallen angel who presents himself to Satan, the first one is Moloch, and he is described as the horrid king, besmeared with blood of human sacrifice and parents' tears. Though for the noise of drums and timbrels loud, their children's cries unheard. So this fallen angel was called Moloch, and he was a horrible king. He was covered all over with the blood of human beings who had been offered as sacrifice to him. And Milton is saying how the children who were sacrificed to him, their cries were drowned. Their parents could not hear their cries because of the sound of the drums, the loud noise of drums and timbrels, which were played, sounded as part of the ceremony. So they were this grim idol. So he was worshipped by him. The Ammonite worshipped in Rabbah and her watery plain, in Argob and in Basan, to the stream of utmost Arnon. So Milton refers to certain places which uh, actually they are now in the modern the Middle East, uh, east of Jordan and Sea of Galilee, like that. So there in ancient times, they were this Moloch was worshipped. And here Milton says, not content with such audacious neighborhood, the wisest heart of Solomon he laid by fraud to build his temple right against the temple of God on that opprobrious hill, and made his grove the pleasant valley of Hinnom. So Moloch was not satisfied with the worship of these Ammonites. So you just make a note that the first fallen angel was Moloch. He was worshipped by the Ammonites, and human sacrifices were offered to him. And uh, he he used fraud to prevail upon the wisest king, that is Solomon. Solomon was in the ancient times, he was a very wise king, and he was also uh, sort of, prevailed by trickery to worship this fallen angel, Moloch, as a false god. Made his grove the pleasant valley of Hinnom. So a temple was built in his honor by Solomon, directly opposite to the temple of God, uh, uh, on Mount of Olives. And he made the pleasant valley of Hinnom a grove that was dedicated to himself. And from this reason, the valley came to be known as Tophet, Tophet thence, and Black Gehenna called. So you will find in this part of Paradise Lost, Book 1, that uh, there are a number of references to these exotic place names. And this is also part of uh, the tradition of epic writing of epic poems. So this is also something that you will find. Now, Milton is following the epic tradition, writing of epic poems. And so the valley came to be known as Tophet and Black Gehenna. And it was regarded as the emblem or the image of hell, the type of hell. So that was the emblem or the image of hell. So it became another hell because this god or this fallen angel, false god, Moloch, was worshipped there. So he's the first one. Next, Chemos. So this was the second fallen angel who presented himself. So note these names. Chemos, the obscene dread of Moab's sons, from Aravad to Nebo, and the wild of southmost Abarim. In Hesibon and Horonaim, Seon's realm, beyond the flowery dale of Sibma, clad with vines. So I'll just explain this. Now, Chemos was the foul object of fear for the tribe known as the Moabites. Moab's sons means the tribe of the Moabites, and he was worshipped from the town of Adoar to Nebo, and Nebo in the north, and by the wild tribes of the southernmost mountain range of Abarim, of southmost Abarim, and also in the cities of Hesebon and Horonaim, in the kingdom of Sion, beyond the flowery valley of Sibma, which was overgrown with vines, clad with vines, and Iliali to the asphaltic pool. So, Iliali actually was a city near Hesebon, which has been referred to the Dead Sea. So, asphaltic here means the Dead Sea, that asphaltic pool. And Milton here, it is uh, really astounding how Milton could remember so many exotic names, and he could rattle off all these names while dictating these lines. And as you know, Milton was totally blind when he composed Paradise Lost. So that's the more of a marvel, really, how he could He was such an erudite, such a scholarly person. Peor, his other name, when he enticed Israel in Sittim on their march from Nile to do him wanton rites, which cost them all. So this god, that is Chemos, he had another name that was Peor, and he was known by this other name when he used his tricks to win over the Israelites. And when they were in this place called Sittim, and in the course of their journey from the river Nile, that is in Egypt, when they were leaving Egypt, to worship him with obscene ceremonies, wanton rites, to worship with obscene ceremonies, and for which they had afterwards to suffer a heavy punishment, so which cost them all. Yet thence his lustful orgies he enlarged, even to that hill of scandal, by the grove of Moloch homicide, last heard by hate. But as Milton says, that yet he was able to extend the sphere of his influence and the obscene ceremonies to that hill of scandal, Mount of Olives, where, uh, as you know, the grove of Moloch was situated. In the previous description you read, and he is actually Moloch homicide means uh, manslayer, because human sacrifices were offered to Moloch. That is why it is called of Moloch homicide, lust heard by hate. And in this way, lust, represented by Chemos, came close to hatred, represented by Moloch. So lust and murder were placed side by side, till good Josiah drove them thence to hell. Uh, till the good Josiah drove both of them out of that place, sending them uh, back to hell. So this is a reference to that uh, kind of a story where Josiah ultimately drove them back to hell. So with these came they, who from the bordering flood of old Euphrates to the brook that parts Egypt from Syrian ground, had general names of Baalim and Ashtaroth, those male, these feminine. So next came two groups of fallen angels, and they had the general names of Baalim and Ashtaroth, the former being males and the latter females. Uh, and they actually were known as such in the region that lay between the old river Euphrates. You must have read in history about the two great rivers, Euphrates and the Tigris. So, in your school days, you must have read about them. So, this is a reference to that river, Euphrates. And this was on the border of Canaan and the river Besor, which separated Egypt from Syria. And for spirits, when they please, can either sex assume or both. So Milton here says that uh, uh, the spirits, they could assume the male sex or the female sex or both sexes at the same time, depending upon their own will. And why was this possible? So soft and uncompounded is their essence pure. So soft and uncompounded here means that their liquid texture, they are made of a kind of a texture which is very soft and is unmixed with any other substance. So it is easy for them to take on different shapes. And uncompounded in there is their essence pure, nor tied or manacled with joint or limb, nor founded on the brittle strength of bones. So, not like human beings, they were not tied or fitted by means of joints or limbs, nor did they depend upon the hard strength of bones, like cumbrous flesh. But in what shape they choose, dilated or condensed, bright or obscure, can execute their airy purposes, and works of love or enmity fulfill. So Milton here says that they could expand themselves or compress themselves, and they could assume any shape they liked. They may look bright or dark, and thus they could accomplish their purposes through the medium of air. And they were made of airy stuff, and they could fulfill their tasks of love or hatred. So the good angels who were with God, who had sided with God, they were the angels of love. They tried to do good to mankind. But the bad angels, the fallen angels who had sided with Satan, who were the followers of Satan, they were full of enmity or hatred. So this is the description of this Baalim and Astaroth. And now let us read on. For those, the race of Israel oft forsook their living strength, and unfrequented left his righteous altar, bowing lowly down to bestial gods. So here, uh, Milton says that for such devils, the people of Israel often renounced their living God and stopped worshipping him at his true temple. Instead, they bowed very low before the idols of devils whom they worshipped. So they were led astray, the people of Israel. So here we Milton is talking about this, and as you can see here that these were the fallen angels coming one by one, for which their heads as low bowed down in battle, sunk before the spear of despicable foes. So they suffered defeat as a punishment for worshipping these devils. And as a punishment, they suffered defeat when they were attacked by their contemptible enemies. And they had to bend their heads equally low to those enemies, despicable foes, contemptible enemies. With these in troop came Astoreth, whom the Phoenicians called Astarte, Queen of Heaven, with crescent horns. So now there is another goddess, false goddess that is, and she was known as Astoreth. And the Phoenicians, the old race of Phoenicians, they called her Astarte, and she was the moon goddess. So she was one of the moon goddesses, and she was represented as having crescent shaped horns, to whose bright image, nightly by the moon, Sidonian virgins paid their vows and songs, in Sion also not unsung, where stood her temple on the offensive mountain, built by that uxorious king, whose heart, though large, beguiled by fair idolatresses, fell to idols foul. So here is a reference to a story, and the poet says that uh, this goddess, she was actually worshipped by the virgins, that is the unmarried girls. And where was she worshipped? She was worshipped by in Sidon, in the city of Sidon. And these virgins, they paid their they offered their prayers and their devotional songs to this bright idol of the goddess every night in the light of the moon, and songs of devotion were addressed to her even in Sion, where a temple dedicated to her had been built on the hill of Scandal, that is the Mount of Olives. So you have seen that this Mount of Olives is called the Hill of Scandal, where most of the temples of these false gods were situated, and they were worshipped there, and all sorts of despicable rites were performed there. And now, as Milton says, in Sion, this temple was built by that large-hearted or wise king, and that wise king is Solomon, who has been referred to before, by that uxorious king. By that, uxorious means a person who is dominated by his wife, or by his wives. So Solomon of legend, it has this legend that he had a large number of wives and concubines. So he was persuaded, beguiled, or tricked by these uh, idolatresses, beautiful idolatresses. Idolatresses here means these women, these wives of Solomon, who worshipped these idols of the goddess, fell to idols foul. So he was dominated by his wives and being misled by these pretty women who were idol worshippers. Solomon also began to worship idols of foul gods. So this is the reference to this uh, uh, false goddess called Astarte. Now, next, this was the next fallen angel. Tammuz came next behind, whose annual wound in Lebanon allured the Syrian damsels to lament his fate in amorous ditties all a summer's day, while smooth Adonis from his native rock ran purple to the sea, supposed with blood of Tammuz yearly wounded. So the next god, or rather the false god, the fallen angel, was called Tammuz, and who, as a beautiful youth, was killed by a boar, and the story of whose receiving that fatal wound, it fascinated the Syrian girls, and they mourned his sad fate every year by singing uh, love songs throughout the summer's day. So here it is said that the Tammuz came next behind, whose annual wound in Lebanon allured the Syrian damsels to lament his fate in amorous ditties all a summer's day, while smooth Adonis from his native rock ran purple to the sea. So while the smooth flowing river Adonis is a river with its waters crimsoned by the blood of Tammuz, believed to be wounded every year, ran from its source in the rocks to join the sea. So this was the story that was uh, going around, and it was sung by the song was sung by uh, uh, these young girls. The love tale infected Sion's daughters with like heat, whose wanton passions in the sacred porch Ezekiel saw when by the vision led his eye surveyed the dark idolatries of alienated Judah. So here the reference is to the love story of Tammuz and Ashtoreth, and it was sung by the girls in Sion with a frenzy of passion. And the saint Ezekiel had been led by a spirit, and he, in a vision, went to the gate of the Lord's house. When he witnessed the lawless passion of these girls, and where his eyes surveyed the wicked idol worship of the Israelites, who had cut themselves off from God, alienated Judah Judah here means the Israelites who had left their worship of the true God, and they had started to worship these gods, these idols, who were the false gods. So this is the story of Tammuz. Next came one who mourned in earnest when the captive ark maimed his brute image, head and hands lopped off in his own temple on the Grancel edge, where he fell flat and shamed his worshippers. Dagon his name, sea monster, upward man and downward fish. So here the next fallen angel was Dagon, and who was genuinely in a state of mourning. Uh, so he was actually mourning for himself, and he was a sea monster. His name was Dagon, and he had the body of a human being above the waist and that of a fish below. So he was a merman, that is to say. Now, when the Philistines they captured the Ark of the Covenant from the Israelites, now the Ark of the Covenant, the reference is to this captive Ark. The Ark of the Covenant, Covenant, this refers to the wooden uh, coffer, Coffer, it's a kind of a wooden box which contained the tables of the Jewish law. And the Phoenicians, you may have heard about them, the Phoenicians. They sorry, not the Phoenicians, the Philistines. The Philistines, they were an ancient tribe. They captured the Ark of the Covenant from the Israelites, and they placed it in the temple of this god Dagon, and there it was placed. And but by the next morning, the image of this god was found fallen on its face to the ground before the ark of the Lord, with its head and hands cut off on the threshold of that very temple. And on seeing which spectacle, the worshippers of this god Dagon, they felt ashamed. So this god was punished, this false god Dagon was punished by the God of the Israelites because the covenant was taken away from the Israelites. Uh, so this is the story of how Dagon, uh, the sea monster's idol, was uh, shamed. Yet had his temple high, reared in Azotus, dreaded through the coast of Palestine, in Gath and Ascalon, and Akron and Gaza's frontier bounds. So here, the references are to these places. Uh, the temple of Dagon was raised high in Ashdod, and it was feared in the whole of the outlying regions of Palestine. It was feared in the cities of Gath, Ascalon, Akron, and Gaza. They were situated on the border of the desert, separating Palestine from Egypt. So, about Gaza, of course, we know in modern Gaza it still survives, but and Palestine, of course, it's a separate country. But these stories are about the ancient times when different people had inhabited them who were idol worshippers, and these people, they worshipped this Dagon, and his temple was there. So this is the story of Dagon, the sea monster. And now next came, him followed Rimmon, whose delightful seat was fair Damascus, on the fertile banks of Abana and Farfar, lucid streams. So Dagon was followed by this fallen angel called Rimmon, whose delightful temple was situated in the fair city of Damascus. Now, Damascus, of course, you know, it's the modern capital of Syria. So Milton is actually talking about all these states or cities rather in the Middle East in the ancient times. So the fair city of Damascus on the fertile territory between the two rivers, Abana and Farfar with their transparent waters. Lucid streams means transparent waters. He also against the house of God was bold. A leper once he lost and gained a king. So here there is a reference to this god, the false god called Rimmon, who had the insolence to defy the true God. And he lost the allegiance of Naaman, who was cured of his leprosy by the prophet Elisha. So Ahaz, his Sottish conqueror, whom he drew God's altar to disparage and displace for one of Syrian mode, wherein to burn his odious offerings and adore the gods whom he had vanquished. So here the reference is to this Rimmon, and as we see, he lost the allegiance of this uh, king uh, called Naaman, who was cured of his leprosy by the prophet Elisha. But he got as a worshipper the foolish king Ahaz. Ahaz, actually who was prevailed upon to speak contemptuously about the place of worship of the true God and replace it with the idol of Rimmon after the Syrian fashion. There he made his hateful offerings to worship the very gods whose followers he had defeated in battle. So this was the story of Rimmon, how he was worshipped by this foolish king called Ahaz, and who defied the true God and started worshipping him. So sottish means drunken. Now after these appeared a crew who under names of old renown, Osiris, Isis, Horus and their train, with monstrous shapes and sorceries, abused fanatic Egypt and her priests to seek their wandering gods disguised in brutish forms rather than human. Now, after Rimmon came a crowd of gods well known far and wide by their old names of Osiris, Isis, Horus, and their followers. Now, Osiris was worshipped under the symbol of a bull, and Isis was believed to have the body of a woman with the horns of a cow. So they were actually worshipped in Egypt. So Milton is here referring to these uh, gods of Egypt who had these monstrous shapes, and they were in the shape of shapes of animals rather than human beings. So brutish forms rather than human, in the form of brutes or animals. And so uh, all these gods and their followers, with their monstrous shapes and magic practices, misled the bigoted Egyptians and their priests to seek their wandering gods disguised in the shape of animals rather than human beings. Nor did Israel escape the infection when their borrowed gold composed the calf in Oreb. So, actually, the Israelites, during their years in the wilderness after leaving Egypt, they made an image of a golden calf in Horeb, in this place called Horeb, and with the gold which they had acquired from the Egyptians. So, they did not escape this infection, as it is called. Uh, uh, and the rebel king doubled that sin in Bethel and in Dan, likening his maker to the grazed ox, Jehovah, who in one night when he passed from Egypt marching, equaled with one stroke both her firstborn and all her bleating gods. So here it is said that how the Israelites in Horeb, they made the image of a golden calf, and Jeroboam, who rebelled against Solomon's successor, doubled the sin of worshipping the golden calf because he made two calves of gold, setting one up in the city of Bethel and the other in the city of Dan. So the rebel king is Jeroboam, and he doubled the sin. So here it is referred to uh, the fact that he made two images, and one he placed in Bethel and one he placed in Dan, likening his maker to the grazed ox. And thus these people gave to their creator the shape of an ox that eats grass. But Jehovah, that is the true God of the Israelites, on the night when the Israelites made their escape from Egypt, slew all the firstborn children and also the firstborn cattle of the Egyptians as a punishment. So the Egyptians were punished like this, equaled with one stroke means killed them. So this is what happened to the people who worshipped this god called, uh, he was called actually all these Horus and the Egyptian gods. Now, Belial came last. So this is the god who came last. Then, whom a spirit more lewd, fell not from heaven, or more gross, to love vice for itself. Now, last of all came Belial, and among the angels who had fallen from heaven, there was none more lustful or more obscene in loving vice for its own sake than Belial. To him no temple stood or altar smoked, yet who more oft than he in temples and at altars, when the priest turns atheist, as did Eli's sons, who filled with lust and violence the house of God. So uh, here it is said that there was no temple built in his honor, and nor was there any altar where incense was burnt for his worship. And yet he was present more often than any other god in temples and at altars when the priest began to disbelieve in the true God. When the priests they began to disbelieve in the true gods, as did the Eli's sons, who were priests at Shiloh, and who filled the temple of God with lust and violence. So here, this is a reference to how Belial reigned in such places, and of course, Milton imagines Belial as a kind of a hidden god, and the sons of Eli were priests, but they were impious men. With lust and violence, the house of God. In courts and palaces he also reigns, and in luxurious cities, where the noise of riot ascends above their loftiest towers, and injury and outrage. So Belial is also worshipped in different areas also. He is worshipped by royal courtiers, by kings and queens, and that is in courts and palaces. And the people of lustful cities, where the noise of revelry and debauchery, of insult and outrage is heard above the highest towers, loftiest towers. So the noise of riot, revelry that rises in the darkness of the night, and injury and outrage. So the as we see the of insult and outrage. And Milton says that, and when night darkens the streets, then wander forth the sons of Belial, flown with insolence and wine. So during the night time, the uh, wicked followers of Belial, they are flushed with wine and arrogance, and they roam the streets. Witness the streets of Sodom, and that night in Gibeah, when the hospitable door exposed a matron to avoid worse rape. So Milton is referring to these stories. The streets of the ancient city of Sodom uh, can be a proof of this. And another proof was the happening in the city of Gibeah one night when a host opened the door and handed over the woman to a mob outside, exposing her to abuse and insult, that a worse outrage could be prevented. So these were the prime in order and in might. So we uh, sort of have gone through the catalog of the fallen angels, the main, fallen angels, and the chief gods in order of rank and power. The rest were long to tell, though far renowned. The Ionian gods of Javan's issue held gods, yet confessed later than heaven and earth their boasted parents. So Milton says that these were the primary gods, but there were others, and it would take a long time, though they were all well known far and wide, to tell about them. They were the Greek gods, and they were considered gods by the Greeks, although they were admitted to be of later origin than heaven and earth. That is Uranus and Gaia, whom they boastfully claimed as their parents. So, Titan, heaven's firstborn, with his enormous brood and birthright seized by younger Saturn, he from mightier Jove, his own and Rhea's son, like measure found. So here Milton is talking about how uh, there were these gods. There was Titan, the eldest son of Uranus. Now, uh, Uranus' son was Titan, with his monstrous and numerous offspring, and his right to rule was seized by his son Saturn. Saturn received similar treatment from the more powerful Jove, who was his own son by Rhea. So here the story of the birth of Jupiter and how he assumed the leadership of the gods, that is referred to by Milton. So Titan was the son of heaven and earth. Heaven was called Uranus and earth was called Ge, Ge. And their son was Uranus, Titan. Uh, and they had a lot of children, enormous brood, and birthright seized by younger Saturn. Saturn. So Saturn was the son of uh, Uranus and Gaia, but he claimed the throne by defeating Titan. And Saturn was also overthrown by Jove or Jupiter, who was his and Rhea's son, like measure found. So Jove usurping reigned. So Jove or Jupiter, he uh, usurped the leadership. He claimed leadership. These first in Crete and Ida known, thence on the snowy top of cold Olympus ruled the middle air, their highest heaven, or on the Delphian cliff, or in Dodona, and through all the bounds of Doric land. So here Milton is sort of rattling off certain names, and you have to just look into this. This region represented their highest reach. That is, first they were known in Crete and on Mount Ida. Then their influence traveled to the snow-covered peak of the cold Olympus mountain. As you know, in Olympus, uh, it is the seat of the gods, the abode of the gods. You have read in the Iliad, and Mount Olympus, from where they ruled the region between earth and heaven. Now, this region represented their highest reach, beyond which they could not go. And later on, they sort of, they fixed their abode on Mount Parnassus, near which was located the seat of an oracle of Apollo at Delphi, or in Dodona, the seat of an oracle of Jove, and they were worshipped throughout the whole of Greece. So he is referring to the Greek gods, uh, or who with Saturn old fled over Adria to the Hesperian fields, and over the Celtic roamed the utmost isles, and who uh, actually those in the company of the old and dethroned Saturn had fled over the Adriatic Sea to the western land of Italy, and crossing the Celtic fields, that is in France, they had roamed over the British Islands. So the Milton is referring to his own country, the utmost isles. All these and more came flocking, but with looks downcast and damp. Yet such wherein appeared obscured some glimpse of joy, to have found their chief not in despair. So the catalogue of fallen angels, it comes to an end here, 521, line number 521, and it begins, as you know, 380 something. So all this time we have been reading about the fallen angels, some of the well-known fallen angels, their names, who worshipped them, where were they worshipped, and also the kind of rites that were performed in their honor. And now Milton, after that, he refers to the Egyptian gods, and lastly to the Greek gods. So actually, they were all pagan, heathen gods to Milton, who was a devout Christian. And so he refers to them as heathen gods, the Greek gods. And lastly, he says that all these and more came, these gods and more came in crowds, but their looks were downcast and dejected. So they came flocking, but looks down with looks downcast and damp, that is dejected, and yet the expression in their eyes were such as to indicate some dark hint of happiness. They were looking very depressed, but still in their appearance could be detected some obscure glimpses of joy, some glimpses of joy, because they found that their commander, their chief, that is Satan, he was not in despair. He had not given himself up to despair, and therefore they believed themselves not to be completely lost in spite of the defeat they had suffered. So, not in despair, to have found themselves not lost in loss itself. So, though they had lost the first battle with God, still they found, when they regained consciousness and in answer to the call of Satan, when they came before Satan and Beelzebub, they noticed that Satan was, of course, not in a despondent mood. He was not in a depressed kind of a mental state. And seeing that they were, they had some little joy, and they were inspired by his looks. So let us stop here today